A group of billionaires sued my son because he was broke, and they thought they had already won. But they didn't know an important thing. I own the company that leases their private jet. While they were 30,000 feet in the air celebrating, I was busy taking the plane back from them. This is the story of how I used a mid-air repossession to save my son and get revenge on the people who tried to ruin him. My son, Elias, is a hard-working guy who fixes drones for a living. He isn't rich, and he doesn't have powerful friends. He just wanted to build a small business to help local farmers. But a huge company called Vesper International didn't like that. They claimed he stole their ideas, which was a lie, and they sued him for millions of dollars. They knew he couldn't afford a lawyer, and they wanted to crush him before he could even start. They did everything they could to make his life miserable. They froze his bank accounts and made sure no one would work with him. I had to watch my son lose his shop and his hope. He thought I was just a retired pilot who didn't understand his world. He had no idea that I actually run a secret business that recovers airplanes all over the world. While he was feeling defeated, I was quietly getting ready to fight back. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button to catch more stories like this. And drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I'll love to hear. The CEO of that company, a man named Julian Vane, was so confident that he decided to take a luxury trip to celebrate his win over my son. He got on his $50 million private jet, thinking he was the most powerful man in the world. What he didn't realize was that I had recently bought the company that actually owns that jet. Because of the illegal ways he attacked my son, he had broken the rules of his lease. That meant I had the legal right to take the plane back immediately. I didn't want to wait for him to land. I wanted to take it while he was still in the sky. I called my best team, and we started tracking his flight. While Vane was drinking expensive champagne at 30,000 feet, my team was already hacking into the plane's systems. He thought the law was on his side, but he was about to find out that I owned the very sky he was flying in. I sat in my office and watched the radar as our team got closer to his jet. Vane had used his money to bully my son, but now I was going to use my power to take away the one thing he loved most. The plan was in motion, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The Vesper wing was moving through the clouds at 500 miles per hour. Inside the cabin, everything was perfect. The air was chilled to exactly 68 degrees. The leather seats smelled like a new car, and Julian Vane was laughing. He had his feet up on a mahogany table, looking at a digital tablet that showed his company's stock rising. To him, my son Elias was just a bug he had stepped on. He had no idea that while he was celebrating, the very air around him was starting to change. I was sitting in a darkened room 300 miles away, surrounded by glowing monitors. My team, the Shadowhawks, were the best in the business. We didn't use guns or masks. We used code and contracts. Phase 1 is green, my lead tech whispered. I nodded. On my screen, I could see the jet's heartbeat, its fuel levels, its cabin pressure, and its flight path. Every piece of data was now flowing through my servers, not Vesper's. Julian Vane reached for his glass of champagne, but as he did, the lights in the cabin gave a tiny flicker. It was so small he probably thought he blinked, but it was the first sign. We had just bypassed the jet's primary security firewall. I watched the radar as our chase plane, a modified cargo jet, began to pull into a blind spot behind him. Vane thought he was alone in the sky, but we were right there, hovering like a ghost. Back in his empty shop, Elias was probably packing his tools into cardboard boxes. He didn't know I was doing this. He didn't know that the retired pilot he saw every Sunday was actually orchestrating a high-altitude heist. I remembered the look on his face when the bailiffs came to take his equipment. He didn't cry. He just looked tired. That look was what kept me focused. Every time Vane took a sip of his wine, I thought about Elias drinking lukewarm coffee in a shop with no power. He's trying to use the Wi-Fi, my text said, pointing to a screen. Vane was trying to send an email, likely bragging about his victory, to his board of directors. I tapped a key. Redirect him. I said. Instead of the internet, Vane's tablet suddenly showed a single document. The original lease agreement for the jet. A red box appeared around the ethical conduct clause. I watched through the cabin's hidden security camera as Vane frowned, tapping the screen. He thought it was a glitch. He had no idea it was a warning. Then, I gave the signal for phase 2. The jet's engines didn't stop, but the tone of the hum changed. We were taking remote control of the flight management system. Up in the cockpit, the two pilots, men I had worked with for 20 years, looked at each other and nodded. They didn't say a word to Vane. They just flipped a series of switches that disconnected the cabin's intercom and locked the cockpit door. Vane was now a passenger in a cage he couldn't control. Vane noticed something was wrong when the plane began to bank to the left. "Hey!" he shouted, standing up and stumbling as the floor tilted. "We're going the wrong way. The island is to the south." He walked to the cockpit door and pulled a handle, but it didn't budge. He banged on the door with his fist. "Open up. What are you doing?" Through the camera, I saw the panic finally starting to hit his face. The untouchable billionaire was starting to realize that money doesn't mean anything when the door won't open and the floor is moving beneath you. I leaned in my microphone. My voice was calm, but I wanted to sound like the end of the world to him. I patched my audio directly into the cabin speakers. "Sit down, Julian," I said. The sound was crisp and loud, filling the luxury cabin. Vane froze. He looked around the empty room, his eyes wide. "Who is this? Is this a joke? I'll have you arrested for this." "You're already under arrest, Julian," I replied. "You're just not in a police station yet. You're in a $50 million piece of property that no longer belongs to you. You defaulted on your lease the moment you used your corporate wealth to commit fraud against a small business owner. My son, to be exact." The silence that followed was heavy. Vane slumped back into his seat, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He tried to pick up his phone, but it was dead. Everything in his world was going dark. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice shaking. "It's kidnapping. It's piracy. It's a repossession." I corrected him. "I'm just taking my property back. And since you're on board, you're just along for the ride." I watched the radar. We were no longer heading for his private island. We were heading for a remote landing strip in the middle of nowhere, where a team of international regulators and my own legal team were waiting. But there was one more thing Vane didn't know. He thought the plane was the only thing he was losing today. He didn't realize that while he was trapped in this metal tube, my team was using his default status to trigger a massive sell-off of his company's shares. By the time this plane touched the ground, Vesper International would be a hollow shell. "Elias is a good man, Julian," I said, watching him through the screen. "He wanted to build things. You wanted to destroy them. Now, you're going to find out what it's like to have no power, no lawyers, and no way out." Vane started to scream, throwing his champagne glass against the bulkhead, but no one was listening. He was alone at 30,000 feet. And I was the only one with the keys to the door. The jet began its descent. The clouds were thick and gray, swallowing the Vesper wing as it dropped lower and lower. Vane sat by the window, his forehead pressed against the glass, looking for any sign of where he was going. He saw nothing but mist. The tension in the cabin was so thick you could feel it through the monitors. He had spent his whole life looking down on people, but for the first time, he was terrified of the ground. I turned to my lead tech. "Prepare for the final approach," I said, "and make sure Elias's phone is on. I want him to be the first one to get the news." We were minutes away from landing, and the real trap was about to spring shut. Julian Vane thought he was the king of the world, but he was about to land in a reality he never saw coming. The landing gear locked into place with a heavy, mechanical thud that echoed through the empty cabin of the Vesper wing. Julian Vane jumped in his seat, his hands gripping the leather armrests so hard his knuckles turned white. He was sweating now, the expensive fabric of his tailored suit clinging to his back. He pressed his face against the window, desperately trying to see through the thick fog outside. He expected to see the sparkling blue water of his private island resort. Instead, he saw cracked concrete, rusted hangars, and weeds growing through the runway. We were landing in an old, decommissioned cargo strip in the middle of the desert, miles away from luxury, miles away from his lawyers, and miles away from anyone who cared about his money. I watched the final descent on my monitors. The tension in my command center was so thick nobody even blinked. The modified flight path was perfect. The pilots up front, my guys, brought the $50 million jet down hard. The wheels slammed onto the rough concrete, shaking the entire plane. Vane was thrown forward against his seatbelt, gasping for air as the reverse thrusters roared, violently slowing the aircraft down. He had spent his whole life gliding over the bumps of reality, insulated by his wealth. Now, he was feeling every single crack in the pavement. The jet rolled to a stop at the far end of the desolate airstrip. The engines whined down, the pitch dropping lower and lower until there was nothing but silence. Then the power cut out. The soft, ambient lights in the cabin went dark. The climate control stopped humming. The quiet was absolute. For a billionaire who was used to the sound of people saying yes to him every second of the day, that silence must have been the most terrifying noise in the world. Down on the ground, I stepped out of my mobile command vehicle. The desert wind was cold and dry, kicking up dust around my boots. I wasn't wearing a suit. I had on my old leather flight jacket and a faded cap, the exact same clothes I wore when I visited my son's drone shop. Behind me stood a team of my recovery agents, alongside 3 federal aviation inspectors and a local sheriff I had known for years. We didn't have weapons drawn. We didn't need them. We had clipboards, legal binders, and a court-approved repossession order that was thicker than a phone book. I walked toward the jet as the main cabin door finally unsealed. The hydraulic stairs slowly lowered to the tarmac with a mechanical hiss. Julian Vane stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted by the emergency exit lights. He looked awful. His tie was pulled loose, his hair was a mess, and he was clutching his phone like it was a lifeline, even though there was zero self-service out here. He stared down at us, his eyes darting from the sheriff's badge to the aviation inspectors. Then, he looked at me. He didn't recognize me. To him, I was just another blue-collar worker, standing in the dirt. What is the meaning of this? Vane yelled, his voice cracking. He tried to puff up his chest, trying to project the authority he used to crush people like my son. I demand to know who is in charge here. Do you have any idea who I am? I am the CEO of Vesper International. I will have all of your jobs. I will sue this entire state. I slowly walked up the steps, my boots clanking against the metal. I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of him, invading his personal space. I looked him dead in the eye. You aren't going to sue anyone, Julian, I said, my voice low and completely calm. And as of 20 minutes ago, you aren't the CEO of anything. Vane blinked, his face twisting in confusion. What are you talking about? Who are you? I'm the man who owns the company that leases this jet, I replied. I'm the man who just legally repossessed it because you breached the ethics clause in your contract. But more importantly, Julian, I'm Elias's father, the mechanic, the kid you tried to destroy just because you could. The blood drained from Vane's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He took a step back, suddenly realizing that the trap he was in wasn't just about business. It was personal. He had picked on a boy who had no money, completely unaware that the boy's father owned the sky he flew in. I handed him a thick folder. While you were trapped in the air without Wi-Fi or phone service, a lot happened down here in the real world. I explained, speaking slowly so every word would sink in. Your company's stock started to crash the moment the financial markets got wind that your flagship asset, this jet, was being seized for default. Your board of directors panicked. They tried to call you, but you were unavailable. So, to save their own wealth, they held an emergency vote. Vane's hands were shaking as he opened the folder. The first page was a printed press release from his own company. "They fired you, Julian," I said. "They terminated you for gross misconduct to distance themselves from the scandal. They also immediately dropped the fraudulent lawsuit against my son to stop the bleeding. You were standing in a plane you don't own, working for a company that just fired you, and holding a phone that can't even get a signal." "No," Vane whispered, staring at the paper. "No, this is illegal. You set me up. I have money. I have offshore accounts." "Maybe," I said, "but your corporate accounts are frozen, and your personal assets are tied up in the company you just got kicked out of. You sued my son because he was broke. You thought poverty was a weapon you could use to erase him. So, I decided to show you what being broke really feels like." I stepped past him and motioned for my recovery crew to board the plane. They moved past Vane like he wasn't even there, heading straight for the cockpit and the cabin to secure the asset. The federal inspectors began taking photos. The sheriff stood at the bottom of the stairs, just watching. "Get off my plane, Julian," I told him. "You're trespassing." Vane looked around, completely lost. "Get off. To where? We're in the middle of nowhere. How am I supposed to get home? Where's my security detail? Where's my car?" "Your security detail works for Vesper International, and you don't," I reminded him. "As for how you get home, that sounds like a problem for a regular guy. I think there's a bus station about 12 miles down the highway. Better start walking before it gets dark." He looked at the desolate road stretching out into the desert. The reality of his situation finally crushed him. The arrogance, the smugness, the power, it all vanished. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. He was just a man in a wrinkled suit, stranded in the dust. He slowly walked down the stairs, his shoulders slumped, dragging his expensive leather briefcase behind him. He didn't say another word. He just started walking toward the empty highway, realizing for the first time in his life that nobody was coming to save him. I let out a long breath and pulled my phone from my pocket. I connected to the satellite uplink on the command truck and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before he picked up. "Dad!" Elias's voice sounded exhausted. I could hear the sound of packing tape in the background. He was still putting his life into boxes. "Hey kid," I said, leaning against the railing of the stairs, watching the sun begin to set over the desert. "What are you doing right now?" "Just packing up the shop," Elias sighed. It broke my heart to hear the defeat in his voice. "The landlord wants the keys by tomorrow morning. The Vesper lawyers sent another notice. It's over, Dad. I'm sorry." "Put the tape down, Elias," I told him, a smile finally breaking across my face. "Unpack the boxes." "Dad, you don't understand the lawsuit." "The lawsuit is gone," I interrupted gently. "Vesper International dropped it an hour ago. They publicly apologized for the misunderstanding. Your bank accounts are being unfrozen as we speak. You get to keep your shop. You get to keep your patents. You won, son." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breathing change. "What? How? Dad, how is that even possible? They were trying to ruin me. Why would they just stop?" "Let's just say management had a sudden change of heart during a flight," I said, looking over at the massive jet behind me, "and they realized they were messing with the wrong family." Elias started crying. They were tears of pure relief. The weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders. He didn't know the exact details yet, and I would have to explain a lot to him when I got back home. I would have to tell him about the network, the recovery business, and the life I had hidden from him to keep him safe. But that could wait for tomorrow. Today, all that mattered was that my boy got his dream back. A few weeks later, Elias reopened his shop. The local farmers rallied around him, bringing him more business than he had ever seen. Without the threat of Vesper International hanging over his head, his stabilization drone tech took off. He was doing what he loved, building things that actually help people, and he was doing it with his head held high. As for Julian Vane, the last I heard, he was still fighting a losing battle in court, trying to sue his former board of directors. He had to sell his mansions just to pay his legal fees. He's currently living in a rented apartment, spending his days making angry phone calls to lawyers who no longer want to talk to him. He found out the hard way that when you try to crush someone just because you think they are weak, you might just wake up the sleeping giant standing right behind them. I went back to my quiet life. I still wear my old leather jacket, and I still go fishing on the weekends. But Elias looks at me a little differently now. He knows that his dad isn't just a retired mechanic. He knows that if anyone ever tries to bully him again, I don't just have his back on the ground. I own the sky. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button to catch more stories like this. And drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I'll love to hear.